Well, good evening again, everyone, and I hope and pray that you're well. Now, I'm doing a recording for tomorrow's message, which is the ANZAC Day message. This message has two readings from Matthew's Gospel and John's Gospel, so I'll read them to us to start with. Matthew 16, verses 13 to 28. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was revealed to you not by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day to be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Well, what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." The second reading is from John chapter 10, verses 1 to 18. "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." This is the word of the Lord. Well, tomorrow is ANZAC Day. when we particularly remember not only the Australian and New Zealand troops who landed at what is now called ANZAC Cove in Gallipoli, Turkey, but all our troops who have fought and served our nation, as well as the experiences of those who were left behind. When war is happening, and particularly when there are tremendous acts of brutality and violence, people can ask the question, where is God in this? You may also hear asked, how can people do this to each other? Humans are made in God's image, and so even though we are now marred by sin, we have the capacity of reflecting something of God's character in our lives. This reflecting of the image of God is recognized in love, nurture, creativity, productivity, and so on. This morning, while I do not want to justify God, to help us see this, we have two gospel readings that have been read for us. They were Matthew 16:13 to 28 and John 10:1 to 18. Now, it is obvious that these verses are not about war, but they are about what war often comes down to: life, death, and the pursuing of higher goals. When done with right motives, we can see the image of God in the attitudes and actions of those who served. To start with, we note that both of these passages are concerned with Jesus' identity as God's agent on earth. In Matthew, he affirms Peter's recognition of him as the Messiah, or Christ, both words meaning anointed one, the person specifically set apart for God's service. And in John, Jesus describes himself as the Good Shepherd, the one who has the task of leading the sheep, which is God's people. As noted by the use of Good Shepherd and Messiah, we see that there are various dimensions or facets of what the Messiah was supposed to do. The Messiah was to be a leader, a king, ruler, and so on. One aspect of Jesus being the Christ was that Jesus represented God on earth. Jesus would say, if we have seen him, we have seen the Father. While humanity in general is made in God's image, and so we can reflect the image of God, God's image will be all the more clearly seen in his agent, who is Jesus, God's Son. So then, what is God's anointed one presented as doing in both of these passages? In Matthew we read, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." John records Jesus explaining why this would take place. "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." One of the ways in which God completely overwhelms my understanding is through this staggering truth that God in Christ gives himself over to death. Charles Wesley put it like this in the song "And Can It Be?" He wrote, "'Tis mystery all, the immortal dies. Who can explore his strange design? In vain the firstborn seraph tries to sound the depths of love divine." When it comes to the philosophical discussion about God, it is almost universally held that God cannot die. After all, if God could die, then God would no longer be God. And yet, here we have Emmanuel, God in human flesh, giving himself up to death. We have then tension. It is the very nature of God not to die, and yet it was the very purpose of God the Son to come and give up his life. And while I don't want to get lost in philosophical debates and the like, when we add to this that God chose us in Christ before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight, then we know that it took the death of God's anointed one for this to happen. And it's reasonable, therefore, to say that the willingness to die, and even death itself, is not foreign to God. Because God is a God of justice, who hates that which damages his people and his creation, then the executing of justice is not divorced from God's character. However, this morning, in focusing on the example of Jesus, we see that a willingness to give up one's life is an expression of the character of God. When soldiers and support personnel have willingly put themselves in harm's way, then way when they accepted that death was a possible and maybe sometimes even a probable outcome of what they were doing, then they have mirrored Christ's character. There is a reason why the story of Simpson and his donkey is cherished in Australia. While some may like the story because they say that it demonstrates the best in human character in the face of horror, I would suggest that there is something in the selfless service of Simpson which resonates with our being because we are made in God's image, and this self-giving care is part of God's character. We next note that this call to surrender our lives is commanded by Jesus. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" Jesus explains something of what dying to self looks like when he says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." At the time when Jesus said this, the Jews were under Roman rule, and they knew what it meant to see someone carrying a cross. Specifically, it meant that they were going off to be killed, and this was a reminder to them, along with all the Jews who were observing, and in fact all the Jews throughout the nation, that they were under Roman rule and control. Why would Jesus use this brutal imagery? Well, you may have heard the expression, "You show 'em who's boss." Well, this is what Jesus is effectively saying. You show 'em who's boss, and it's not you. You're not the boss. Jesus is saying, in your life, you show them that I am your boss, that you follow my example of carrying a cross. Military training can be difficult and even brutal. I don't think I would handle it. I mean, I can't imagine a training sergeant being too happy if he said to me, "Recruit, I didn't see you at camouflage training yesterday," only for me to reply, "Thank you, Sergeant." However, as much as we value individuality in the West, we are also impressed when we see the sacrifice and commitment it takes, the willingness to daily die to self. For a corps to work together in almost perfect unison, we see this in the mesmerizing marching bands and in the drill demonstrations. But the greater goal in a life or death situation is that the corps will work together for their common purpose. Charles Plumb was a US Navy jet pilot in Vietnam. After 75 combat missions, his plane was destroyed by a surface-to-air missile. Plumb ejected and parachuted into enemy hands. He was captured and spent 6 years in a communist Vietnamese prison. He survived the ordeal and now lectures on lessons learned from that experience. One day, when Plumb and his wife were sitting in a restaurant, a man at another table came up and said, "You're Plumb. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You were shot down." "How in the world did you know that?" asked Plumb. "I packed your parachute," the man replied. Plumb gasped in surprise and gratitude. The man pumped his hand and said, "I guess it worked." Plumb assured him, "It sure did. If your chute hadn't worked, I wouldn't be here today." Plumb couldn't sleep that night, thinking about that man. Plumb says, "I kept wondering what he had looked like in a Navy uniform. A white hat, a bib at the back, and bell-bottom trousers. I wonder how many times I might have seen him and not even said good morning, how are you, or anything, because, you see, I was a fighter pilot and he was just a sailor." Plumb thought of the many hours that the sailor had spent at the long wooden table in the bows of the ship, carefully weaving the shrouds and folding the silks of each chute, holding in his hands each time the fate of someone he didn't know. Not only do we see the character of Christ when we see military personnel willingly put themselves in harm's way, we also see the character of a disciple demonstrated when we see a daily dying to self by the military personnel, so that they are able to work under orders for a greater purpose. When they do this, they demonstrate that they are willing not to be the boss, but to do their part to bring to pass what the unit is working towards. While we may hate war and the devastation it causes, we've seen two ways in which military personnel can help us see where is God in this. There is one more way we can answer this question from the readings we've heard today, and that is the purpose for which something is happening. So then why did Jesus willingly give up his life, and why do followers of Jesus die to self? Reading again from Matthew. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can someone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done." Paradoxically, Jesus says that in dying to self, we are actually saving our lives. There is a greater purpose which we aspire to here. Specifically, we are to seeking the Father's approval and the reward of Jesus above any gain which we might otherwise seek in this life. What will it mean for us to seek God's honour and approval? We get a deeper insight into what the greater purpose is that we are to strive for when we look at Jesus' purpose. Earlier I read verse 11 from John chapter 10. "I am the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." We understand then that it was for the sake of others that Jesus laid down his life, but a beautiful expression as to why Jesus does this is found in the previous verse, where Jesus contrasts his actions and the motivations of those who come against God's people just for personal gain or for ulterior motives. Jesus said, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Jesus came and gave up his life so that we may have life and life to the full. We know that military personnel, like the rest of us, are a mixed bag of motivations. Some enlist for adventure, or because of peer pressure, or as a chance to prove themselves, and so on. However, one reason we express our appreciation for their service is because it is because of their sacrifice that we can enjoy the freedom that we now have. We can enjoy life to the full life opportunities. One of the ways in which military personnel can represent the character of Jesus is by fighting not for some philosophical or theoretical idea or ideal, but when they are fighting for people. Military personnel are at their best when they fight so that people can have a fullness of life, and so that people can have the freedom to choose that life for themselves. Once again, this message isn't to glorify war, or even blindly to elevate those who go into conflict. It is to help us to see that people are still made in God's image and can represent the character of Christ, even in some of the most painful of circumstances. We see this when military personnel willingly put themselves in harm's way, even risking or losing their lives. We also see this when we are willing daily to die to self, so that we are part of a bigger picture, working together for the greater purpose of a corps or a unit. Finally, we see this when military personnel go into conflict, not for the sake of the destruction of the other, but for the sake of the people and lives of those whom they are serving. And we express our thanks for the military men and women who have served our country with honour and nobly. Thank you.